Picture this. You are standing on Madison Square in 1899. They are about to build a building shaped like a flat iron, 22 stories tall, on what used to be a swamp. There is a problem. New York City is not made of solid ground. It is made of mud, fill, construction debris, the bones of demolished buildings going back to the Dutch. To put a 22-story tower on top of that, somebody's going to have to drive iron pilings 90 feet straight down to the bedrock. The architect is a man named Daniel Burnham. He is from Chicago. He has built tall things before, but not like this. Nobody has built like this, not on this kind of ground. How do you sink iron 90 feet through wet earth in 1899 when modern hydraulic equipment will not exist for another half a century? The answer is a 30-ton steam-powered drop hammer operated by a crew of 8 immigrant men, most of whom we will never know the names of. Let me back up. The problem with Manhattan was always the ground. The bedrock under the island goes from 18 feet down in lower Manhattan to 260 feet down in Greenwich Village. Anywhere you wanted to put a tall building, you had to find that bedrock first. By 1900, the city had more than 12,000 buildings of 6 stories or more. Every one of them was sitting on top of pilings that somebody had hammered into the rock. The proof of concept came earlier. The Brooklyn Bridge started in 1869, finished in 1883. The chief engineer was a man named Washington Roebling. Roebling needed to anchor 2 giant stone towers in the bottom of the East River. To do it, he sank what were called pneumatic caissons, wooden boxes the size of a house, pumped full of compressed air, dropped to the river floor. Workers climbed down inside them, breathing pressurized air, and dug out the mud underneath until the caisson reached bedrock 80 feet below the surface. What nobody understood at the time was what compressed air does to the human body. When the men came back up too fast, nitrogen bubbled inside their blood. They called it caisson disease. We called it the bends. Some men were paralyzed. Some died screaming. Roebling himself caught it. He spent the rest of his life in a wheelchair, watching his own bridge being finished through a telescope from the window of his apartment in Brooklyn. About 27 men died building that bridge, most of them from the bends, most of them Irish and Italian, most of them buried without records. One of them was a man whose name nobody bothered to write down. He was probably from Donegal or Calabria. He was probably 22 years old. He went down into the caisson at 4 in the morning on a Wednesday. He breathed compressed air for 11 hours, digging mud out from under a stone tower the size of a cathedral. When his shift ended, he climbed up too fast. By the time he reached the surface, he was bent over, vomiting, unable to speak. He died on the deck before they could get him to a hospital. They wrote Italian, age unknown, in the log. If you want more stories about the Americans who built the impossible before modern machines, subscribe to Iron Pioneers. There is a new one every week, and the next one is bigger than this one. Now, the pile drivers themselves. The biggest manufacturer in America was a company called Vulcan Iron Works, founded in Chicago in 1852. Their flagship machine was the Vulcan No. 1, a timber frame the size of a 4-story building, cables, pulleys, a coal-fired boiler at the base, and at the top, an iron weight that weighed 30,000 pounds. These were not the small machines that drive wooden stakes for fence posts or pier pilings. These were foundation machines. They drove iron and timber columns through mud, through fill, through buried walls, all the way down to solid stone. Sometimes they hammered for 3 days on a single piling. 15 tons of iron lifted 19 feet by steam, dropped onto the head of a piling, lifted again, dropped again, every 8 seconds when the boiler was running hot. Imagine standing 50 feet away from that. The concussion, the ground vibrating. The sound was a physical thing. The men who worked the cables in the boilers went deaf, most of them within a year. The crew was 8 men, 2 operators on the steam controls, 4 cable handlers walking the lines, 2 boiler stokers shoveling coal at the base. They worked 12-hour shifts in winters where the East River froze over. Most of them did not speak English when they showed up. They learned the work by watching. They learned the silence of being deaf by the time they were 30. I have walked over the Brooklyn Bridge 100 times. I have stood in front of the Flatiron Building and looked up. Nobody stops to look anymore. By 1920, Manhattan had the world's first skyline. The Flatiron, finished in 1902, was for a while the tallest building on Earth. The Woolworth Building, finished in 1913, was 792 feet tall and required 69 pilings driven through 110 feet of soil to reach bedrock. Every one of those pilings was driven by a steam hammer. Every one of those hammers was run by a crew of immigrants whose names are on no plaque, in no book, in no history class. A few of them are still down there, inside the foundations. The records are not clear. When a man fell into a caisson during a hammer cycle, nobody pulled the body out. They poured concrete over him and kept driving. The next time you see a photograph of the Manhattan skyline in a movie, look at the bottom of the buildings. Look at where they meet the ground. That is where iron men stood. That is where 30 tons of iron fell every 8 seconds for 30 years. That is where the city was built. If this story moved you, subscribe so the next one finds you. The machines are forgotten. The men are forgotten. We are the only ones still telling these stories. Iron Pioneers, every week.